Hello everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel, and this, unfortunately, is Abram Beener, and today we are here to talk about something kind of peculiar, one of Abram's hot takes, if you will, quote-unquote. Abram believes, and he is positing, that Splatoon 2 is Splatoon, I believe, is Nintendo's most important game released in the HT era over Breath of the Wild, which some people, I think most people, would consider their biggest, most important game of these last few generations. But if you want to argue with us, presumably, about this or anything else, you can join our Discord. The link is in the top description. And of course, while you're down there, you can subscribe to the channel, which you should if you're not already, because, I don't know, I'll probably hate you otherwise. And you can like the video, you can ring the bell, because there's so much shit that we're doing. It's insane. And also, leave a comment, because I read them, and neither of us respond to them, usually. Abram, give me your thesis. How do you want to start this?
Tucker, let me put it. Usually we make videos for an international audience. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Today we're making a video just for the English speakers among us. You know what I'm saying? Because here's the situation. I have picked up on what I think is an unfortunate dichotomy within the larger Nintendo community, larger gaming industry as a whole.
Okay.
And that is people who live in Japan understand that Splatoon is fucking massive, and people who are outside of Japan don't.
Sure.
And what I want to talk with you about today, Tucker, is the fact that Splatoon as a franchise is the biggest thing Nintendo has going on right now, and it is an S-tier Nintendo IP without question. Now, when I say that, by the way, I got new Star Wars
Feathers are ruffled. Congratulations. Very
leave
proud.
a nice comment below.
Yeah.
When I say that, Tucker, what do you feel in your fucking abdomen?
Well, I'd say I've been slightly desensitized to this whole discussion, because you have posited this multiple times. Of course, across the course of our history of recording BLB videos. You've brought up this topic and talking about how Splatoon is an S-tier franchise. And I think, for me, at least back in the day, I've certainly come more around to this, because maybe just because it's like having a hammer and a nail going ding ding ding. Or, eventually you get used to it. You know?
Sure.
But initially, and I think still to some degree, I push back a little bit against that, because I think the S-tierness of the franchises that I perceive as Nintendo's S-tier are so selective, because they have been around for a long time. They have branched out into other kinds of media that prove their S-tierness.
Sure.
They have so many entries and are so widely culturally appropriated. That's not the right word, but that's what denotes them as S-tier to me. That's Pokemon, Mario, Smash, Mario Kart, and Zelda. At least that's for me. That's what I would consider S-tier. And there's ones that are certainly encroaching on that. Something like Animal Crossing, Kirby, of course, up there as well. But Splatoon, I think, because it is so new, it feels a little bit hard for me to denote as an S-tier, and to put it above something like Odyssey or Breath of the Wild or Mario Kart 8 or Smash Ultimate as the most important game of their HD generation, only by a few personal denominators that make it hard for me to consider it above. But I'm ready and willing.
Sure.
Legs open. Spread eagle. Ready for you to prove me wrong.
Okay. This is why this video is important, because the only reason here's the thing, because you're hip to the youth.
Well,
and that's why I like.
No, let's not make people think that I am.
You're hip to the youth in terms of age difference, not in terms of sensibility, but in terms of age difference of the youth. You might, in some circles you run in, you are part of the youth. And here's what I want to raise, Tucker.
Sure.
We're having some conversations, some secret conversations, Ninty Fresh stuff, and there were older members of the team expressing a feeling that, to them, Splatoon doesn't even really feel like a Nintendo series.
Okay, interesting.
And I think that a lot of the perceived issues people have with Splatoon in terms of giving it that top tier status comes solely from its age. Because you said a couple of things that I think are very peculiar, not in a good or a bad way, but just worth noting. You think about the multimedia presence, right?
Yeah.
And this is where one of the places where I think the Japanese and then not Japanese divide really starts to show up. Okay. Because Splatoon it has a humongous multimedia presence. So I'm not just talking about merchandise, not just talking about going in and you're finding the fucking candy with Splatoon on it and everything.
Sure.
Or we're
Which I'm sure
buying the
that exists.
it is, and it tastes terrible. It's a conversation another time.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of Splatoon merch.
Come back next week for the BLB video game based candy ranking.
Sure, I've had 2 of them. Actually 3. Here's the bottom line. Splatoon has a very popular manga series
Okay.
that has spanned both games, tons of volumes. You can go out and you find it online. I think it's actually been, I think Viz Media picked it up here in the States. So you can find it translated in English. Very, very popular series. There are Splatoon like Hollow Girl concerts in Japan. You know,
I'm aware of those. Yes. I have
Yes.
seen those on YouTube.
and think about the other franchises that get a not that treatment, because you don't have fucking Pikachu shaking his badonkadonk to like the Route 2 theme on stage, but the franchises that get the huge concerts are Zelda,
Yeah.
and you know, Pokemon. Those are the big ones usually get them. But Splatoon has those, and Splatoon has them on a level of production that's fucking not touched by anyone.
Of course.
You don't have fucking Daruk shimmying back and forth on the stage, or
God, I wish.
So Splatoon has that multimedia presence.
Sure.
It also has a sales history that is so much more impressive than a lot of the franchises that we connotate to be important to Nintendo.
Sure.
You mentioned Kirby. The highest selling Kirby game has millions lower than Splatoon 1, a new IP on Wii U with an install base of 14 million. Right? Metroid, the entirety of the Metroid series, you can fit those sales inside the sales of Splatoon 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Splatoon 2.
Yeah, that's just like categorically, factually true.
Right.
And I think that's also something that maybe needs to be like, we need to have a sit down with the Nintendo community and say like, hey, these franchises that are obviously iconic, they're important to video game history, maybe they're not as big as you want to think they are. That's a different conversation, but
that's a different
conversation.
Saying. I mean, I'm a big fucking Star Fox fan and F-Zero fan and Donkey Kong and Metroid and all these, and these franchises still like
Donkey Kong, not important.
see, here's the thing. Donkey Kong is important.
I'm joking.
For different reasons, and this is the situation we need to bore in on. Again, when you look at all these different reasons we bring up, Splatoon fails on the age front only. It doesn't fail on the sales front. It doesn't fail on the multimedia front. It doesn't fail on the creativity front by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure. Yeah.
13.3 million copies of Splatoon 2 sold is astronomical.
Sure.
Splatoon, with 2 games, has gotten to a position of cultural relevance in Japan in a way that few other Nintendo franchises do. You go to Nintendo Tokyo, and the lineup of characters walking along the banner is, this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's
Mario, Link, Isabelle, Inkling, right?
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah. That says something major, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
People just do not acknowledge what I'm saying. Then these are just objective facts. There are concerts, there is this manga, there's merchandise everywhere. This game's still fucking way bigger than other franchises. That, to me, and then we'll talk about the creativity in a moment, but just on paper, the nuts and bolts, those are the nuts and bolts of an S-tier franchise.
Sure. Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I was aware of a good portion of that. You know, you've certainly elucidated the audience to some,
because they're fucking stupid.
But I would say that it is not illogical for people in our position, and especially if they're older, if they're not as ingrained with, you know, the young ones like us, to be hesitant towards Splatoon's S-tierness, as anyone who doesn't live in Japan, which last time I checked is most of the world's population, to be confused that people are, that it can be even possible for it to reach that status. Because it, you know, we're listing all these facts. It is also factual that basically none of that has crossed over into the pop culture of the rest of humanity. Like, we don't get those concerts here. The manga, I've heard people talk about Pokemon manga, of course, that's been going for a long time, Zelda manga, stuff like that. People don't talk about the Splatoon manga here. You don't see on, well, I guess you might see on the shelves like Splatoon merch next to the other things, but it isn't as culturally relevant here on a lot of those fronts. But I also would say, at least from my perspective, we're trying to really narrow down what each of us denotes as an S-tier franchise. I think having worldwide mass media appeal is very important. That's a part of the S-tierness that, you know, Japan and America and Europe all went through Pokemon fever. The Mario song in Japan was on the top charts, and the Mario movie was big here. Like, there is a a worldwide appeal, which of course Splatoon has. It's sold very well, but it
Yes.
is very culturally relegated to Japan for specific sensibilities for it, sales for it, its appeal in mass media that doesn't apply elsewhere.
Right.
And so if I, as an American who has lived my life entirely as an American, I've never lived as someone else, it's hard for me to put it up with Smash, which I hear everyone talk about, and I know its legacy, and obviously its influence. We're seeing all these Smash clones come out. There are Mario clones, there are Pokemon clones. Splatoon doesn't have the history for that yet.
Right.
It's possible that we'll get Splatoon clones one day, but also maybe not, because obviously shooters were big before Splatoon and are bigger in other areas otherwise. But I think its newness also combined with its niche appeal in terms of geography is something that drastically separates it from those other franchises that are so important to Nintendo for its entire legacy.
Yeah.
But if we're focusing on the HD era, I think you have a point to make. But in terms of over the course of, what is it, 30 plus years of Nintendo, more than that, I don't know if I can really feel comfortable making that case when the S tier has so many qualifiers, at least for me.
Yeah, so I think the point about it needing to be worldwide is well taken.
Yeah.
But I also think the point goes in the opposite direction too, of we have such an Americanized view of not only Nintendo but the industry as a whole.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And at a certain point, I do think that the games and the franchise's size in Japan counts, in my opinion, for as much as, if not more than, its relatively lower appeal elsewhere. Because ultimately, that wave is going to come across. And
we'll see. Yeah.
And it's coming, and I think it's signaled in a couple ways, right?
Okay.
A big one is Splatoon being given, for whatever reason it happened, but being given a fall release, right? Mm-hmm. It's now being moved into a more important release window, for sure.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation to get into in a second when we actually talk about why I think the game is so rich on a creative, aesthetic, mechanical level, which cements it, I think, higher than a lot of the franchises that's held in the highest regard by Nintendo fans.
Sure.
But I also think, and again, it's the qualifier of the most important game of the HD era, right? Mm-hmm. Because the fact that Nintendo has a franchise infiltrating that S tier, I think it's already there, but I think that even you would agree that it is on its way there.
Sure. Yeah.
That counts for a whole hell of a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because here's the thing about Breath of the Wild, for instance, because I think it's fair to bring that up as a logical comparison, right?
Yeah.
I believe it's best-selling Zelda game. I'm almost positive about that.
Yeah.
Incredibly influential. Like, we can see its design influence reflected in other games in a way you can't really with Splatoon.
Yes.
Ninjala, Criello, Scoot, no one gives a fuck. But
Jesus Christ, I can't even believe we uttered those fucking names here.
but
we're gonna conjure some fucking demons by mentioning them.
But Breath of the Wild obviously has that impact and that importance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's a fucking Zelda game ultimately. Yeah. And here's the thing about it, right? Importance, S tier, these things go hand in hand, but there's more to being important than being in the S tier, because here's the situation, right? Breath of the Wild, very important on a design level, sold a shit ton of copies. But what does that do for Nintendo's stable of IP?
Sure.
Ultimately, nothing really. It reinvents Zelda, but Zelda didn't necessarily need reinvention. It's always going to be huge.
Yeah.
It made that series fresh again, but the comparative impact of getting a franchise that skyrockets as high as Splatoon to the comparative impact of taking a franchise that already sold well, was already culturally important, and making it even better, those don't really compare to me.
No, I absolutely agree.
Because what's the criticism against Nintendo? Or a main criticism against Nintendo? Because I have many criticisms against Nintendo. A main criticism. Same stuff over and over and over again.
Milking franchises. Having entries in said franchises feel similar in certain regards. Which, of course, is a problem across the entire industry, right. But a lot of people external to the Nintendo community certainly rag on Nintendo for that. It's like, man, it's 2022, they're still making just Pokemon, Mario, and Zelda?
Yeah. And now they have Splatoon. So even though Zelda is more, it is still Zelda, right? Mm-hmm. But Splatoon isn't that. It's an injection of not only create capital in terms of these incredible sales, this multimedia presence. It makes Nintendo more visible. It makes Nintendo more diverse. There's no other game Nintendo has released in the last era that has done that.
Yeah, no, I think that maybe the point about Breath of the Wild in its reinvention of Zelda, it comes to, I think, many people be where their focus goes towards what's the most important thing Nintendo's done in the last few years. Not only because it is the highest selling Zelda, which I think is not necessarily even close to its most important aspect, because yeah, it's the best selling Zelda, but I don't believe it's by like a huge margin. I think it's a
You
significant
talk, I'll
margin,
research.
but like
I'm not sure actually.
but I think that its direct influence that you can feel, and its worldwide appeal,
Yeah.
and launching with the console and all of this, I think those are why it is in the eyes of most people.
Yeah.
Splatoon 2 is a bigger game than the first one. It did have obviously long tail on it. They supported it for a long time. We got the Octo expansion. We're getting Splatoon 3. These are undeniable factors. But it is interesting to talk to people about the Switch, to talk about the games that have come out from Nintendo in the last few years. For the vast majority of people, Splatoon 2 doesn't really enter that top of the conversation because in the eyes of most people, it is just another Splatoon game. It is Splatoon 1 plus. And that's what it was when it came out. Of course, it differentiated itself when we got the Octo expansion. There were more things added. But in terms of one of the main criticisms, as you said, about Nintendo, we're talking about Splatoon 2 here, being that their franchises are doing the same thing over and over again. Splatoon 2 is one of the, I think, most specific instances of that happening. It is very derivative of the first one. It is expansion. It is a refinement. It is the better game, and one of my favorite games. I'm not crapping on it, but if we're framing the lens through Splatoon as a franchise, or maybe the first game, but there are qualifiers on each side which I think do knock a few holes in what you're saying, but it's hard to say in terms of like this larger cultural enigma that we can't really relate to as Americans. Like it's confusing.
I mean, here's the thing about it, right? Like, Smash Bros. Ultimate, obviously one of Nintendo's biggest games of all time.
Yes,
it's no more or less iterative than Splatoon 2.
Oh, absolutely. No, yeah, of course.
And here's the situation about Splatoon 2. It became something much bigger, but it certainly began very iteratively.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the alternative? Splatoon Deluxe? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Splatoon 2 was in a position where Splatoon was for the Wii U very big. 5 million copies. That's roughly 1 in 3 people with a Wii U bought Splatoon, and that's fucking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're in a tricky crossroads here, right?
Me?
Yes, you are. You're actually about to be hit by 2 different cars. They're gonna fly. It's gonna be like the fucking Dubai part in Fast and Furious. You're gonna fly through your house and bisect you. Here's the situation, right? You got to get Splatoon on Switch because you know Splatoon is so important. Yeah, that's another reason. That was another signifier of Splatoon's importance, right? Splatoon is not a curiosity from the Wii U era. Mm-hmm. It was isolated as a very important game to come to Switch year 1.
Yeah.
And the way they did that was not to just slap a deluxe on it, seem modest in a modest increase in sales and call it a day. It was to let's put our foot in the door with the proper sequel because this is a game that is going to be important to us.
Yeah.
Because you have to think about not only because I'm gonna pull in another string here that's important to Splatoon's importance. Sorry to use the same word twice in a sentence. Splatoon has radically altered how Nintendo releases their games.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that for the better? No.
Yeah.
But that's because other games don't do this as well as Splatoon did.
Sure. Yeah.
The content release model that Nintendo employs for a lot of games is directly attributed to Splatoon.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many things you can look at inside of Nintendo. The decision to get a sequel on Switch first year, mm-hmm. the reverberation it has felt through Nintendo's larger catalog in terms of how content's released. The sales, the multimedia. Like, I don't see a way in which the influence is not recognized inside and outside of Nintendo.
Sure. Yeah. I think that you make an interesting point about it reframing how their games are released, and especially the fact that Splatoon. I think people would be hard pressed to disagree with this. Maybe outside of like Smash DLC being kind of similar, but not really.
It wasn't the game as a service. Splatoon was.
Yeah, sure, no. But what I'm saying is like it doing it best because Splatoon from the ground up was built for additional content, for community and the test fire and Splatfest and all of that, and them applying it to the other games. It's because these franchises have existed for a while and were not made. They're not structured for this kind of release. But crap, I can't remember where I was going with that.
if you want to ponder your theoretical orb, I have a direction to take that actually.
Yeah, sure.
You raise an interesting
Oh,
point
no,
about
actually, hold on. Nope. Did it ring, ding, ding, ding? I remember where I was going with that. The reason I might, for a little bit, push back against it Splatoon being important because it changed the way that Nintendo
yeah.
releases their games is because it's not like Splatoon was the first one to do that. Nintendo was following a larger trend of the industry. Splatoon was just they're in for that. They made a game that was similar to the structure that we had been seeing with other
Yeah.
content games like Destiny or Division or whatever other games that were releasing around that time. Splatoon was there into that, and of course then it changed that. But I also don't think it's impossible to foresee a world where Splatoon didn't happen and we were still getting the light content at launch and then Aces filled in at the end, or Kirby Star Allies, or yada
Yeah.
yada yada. I don't necessarily think that point, and I'm look, I agree with you on the whole here. I'm
Yeah.
trying to just bolster your argument by maybe poking some holes in it that you can seal up with a little bit of gack, a little bit of what's the guy he slaps the tape on? He's a flex
Phil
seal.
Swift.
But
What is Phil Swift's essence?
but I think you're right though. But I don't think that the change in the content rollout is necessarily a huge bolster to Splatoon's importance.
I think it is in the sense that how many other games have radically overhauled the way Nintendo releases games.
Sure.
Like I think about New Super Mario Brothers. New Super Mario Brothers ridiculously important because it illustrated to Nintendo there is a path forward for effectively the video game version of the legacy sequel for movies.
Sure.
We've been thinking about
Yeah.
Top Gun a lot recently, right?
Mhm.
But without New Super Mario Brothers, I don't think you get Donkey Kong Country Returns
Mhm.
or Kirby's Return to Dreamland or a lot
Yeah.
of games like that. This is a similar thing on like a meta level. This showed Nintendo, sure, this has existed in the past, right?
Mhm.
But it showed Nintendo we can apply this model to our games.
Mhm.
And everything in the industry borrows from someone else.
Yeah, of course.
Destiny brought the game as a service to console, but Destiny was ripping off World of Warcraft. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that doesn't make Destiny's contribution any less important. And considering Nintendo largely exists in their own bubble,
Yeah.
Splatoon being the one to bring this model in here is as important as Breath of the Wild bringing pre-established Western development ideas to Nintendo stable. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
Splatoon not only showed Nintendo a new way to release their games, but it also allowed them to solidify their understanding of how online gaming worked.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's a great point.
The test fires, the emphasis they place on online. How many Nintendo games before this had their design emphasis placed on online play?
Yeah.
I would argue very few. I mean, you can go back to weird shit like Metroid Prime Hunters and say to me, oh, Nintendo made this game with this online multiplayer with the intention of illustrating that Wi-Fi you could play games online with people, right?
Yeah.
But Splatoon was different in the sense that Nintendo now saw a path in the modern era through the lens of let's make online experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So Splatoon not only contributed all the things we talked about already, but it illustrated new ways that Nintendo could make their games. And that's the level of influence that a lot of Nintendo series simply don't have, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of structure, I think that's absolutely true. And we always talk about how Nintendo is behind the times.
Yeah.
Online especially. But, credit where credit's due. Splatoon was the one that was like, hey, maybe we can do this.
Right.
Period. In our big budget games, in our new IP, and something that we are going to push and focus on online play as the main thing. Because let's be real, no one gives a piss about the, especially the Splatoon 1 campaign. Frankly, no one gives a piss about the Splatoon 2 campaign. Are they very good? I don't know. I played the Splatoon 2 campaign. I thought it was okay. Don't really remember almost anything about it.
Yeah.
But I think that is absolutely. I think that might be actually the best point that you've made here. That is starting to convince me a little bit.
Yeah, and
not that I needed much convincing.
Right. So let's just recap for a second before I get into what is I think the most subjective stuff I want to talk about.
Sure. Okay.
Objectively, humongous sales.
Yeah.
Far bigger sales than a lot of traditionally connotated to be important Nintendo series.
Yeah.
Humongous multimedia influence, particularly in Japan. Manga, concerts, merchandise, things of that nature, right? A huge impact on how Nintendo thought about online gaming, huge impact on how they released future games.
Yeah.
Growing influence in the release calendar, being positioned as a year one important Switch title, being moved into a holiday slot for Splatoon, holiday quote unquote fall slot for Splatoon 3.
Yeah.
all of these things totally objective facts about what Splatoon has accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now we get to the subjective part, but I think it is
Sure.
as important, if not more important, than what we've been talking about already,
Okay.
which is just the game as a reaffirmation of Nintendo being creative and Nintendo's ability to make Splatoon says
Yeah.
a lot about Nintendo's ability today,
Yeah, no,
right?
I absolutely agree with that. I think
Yeah.
that something that I have noticed and thought about as I've dug back into Nintendo's history is that it is the moments where something new really does happen, and whether
Yeah.
that's in a new IP or one of their established IPs, something like Mario Galaxy or Breath of the Wild, that were these
Forgotten
cultural
Land?
moments. Sure, or yeah, or Forgotten Land, Legends Arceus, these games that we're talking about, reinventions. But in That's not bringing that up here. But it is the scant new IPs in the last 20 years that have been established. And I think that maybe the reason why I personally gravitate quite a bit towards ARMS as my
Yeah.
example of something that I resonate with personally is that that's the one that I got when it came out. I was following it before it came out. I was frankly not really aware of Splatoon 1 before it came out. I have the game on Wii U. I probably played it a handful of times. I'm obviously aware of it now, aware of its legacy now. But when we talk about the fact that, it's really just like Pikmin, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, and I would say ARMS, but I don't think anyone else would say ARMS that have like crossed into that. That is, and Splatoon is, as outside of Animal Crossing, is the only one that has like stepped up to being Nintendo's big thing. I think that's absolutely one of the most important things about Splatoon. Yeah.
This is almost a non sequitur, but I like bringing it up.
Okay.
One of the
Point of BLB.
the most
Off the cuff, BS.
the most I forgot that was their tagline. The most important
Is that
new
still on the fucking thing?
who gives a turkey? Are the fucking arms logos still on our channel header?
Yes. No, yeah, because I have never changed it yet.
Um, Me's and we as a franchise, we
Yeah,
fit.
still on there.
We fit, we sports, we party, we music, all that. That was a new IP, and I feel like sometimes we forget
Sure.
about it because it was more of like a new lifestyle addition
Yeah.
to the Nintendo ecosystem. But
It was like Nintendo is making these games. These are games
yeah,
made by Nintendo.
like that was a weird situation where the IP was just so synonymous with Nintendo existing that I think sometimes it gets overlooked, and I even overlook it.
Sure. Yeah.
But the brand is basically dead, so I don't think I would consider it for a high tier anymore. But there was a period of time where I think that was Nintendo's most valuable IP by a fucking arm and a leg.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but that's a bygone era. We're not in that bygone era.
Mhm.
And I think you're totally right. Nintendo's ability to do something new is there. It's
Yeah.
latent. And it
Mhm.
takes examples that you listed to
Yeah.
bring it to the surface. And no example has bubbled further above the surface than Splatoon.
Yeah.
Because it really was the complete package, right? You think about Splatoon.
Oh, okay, I'll do it. Just for you.
It's so
As a treat.
it's so classically Nintendo. Let's take an established genre and let's subvert it. Let's put our twist on it. We've got the third person shooter. Every third person shooter looks the same.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not talking about aesthetically. I'm talking about either it's a fucking cover third person shooter, or it's a bebopping and scatting third person shooter.
Sure. Yeah.
But Nintendo made a third shooter but bebopping and scatting, but you're not scatting on the opponent, you're scatting on the ground. You know what I'm saying?
And if there's anything that Abram is, it's a scat fan.
And I think Nintendo's ability to so radically recontextualize a series like this, the way that they've done in the past for the platformer and the racer and the multiplayer game and everything, was done here in a very classically Nintendo way. And then you layer on an aesthetic that produces gentlemen like this young man right here. It's bold, it's striking, it's creative, it's distinct, it's everything that Donkey Kong is, right? You know what I'm talking about? Nintendo proved again that even today they're not fucking, their chamber's not empty. You know what I'm saying? They can make a gameplay experience and a visual experience that is as creative as what they used to be able to make.
Yeah, no, that's actually very interesting. I mean, tying back to what I was saying about they're feeling like there's not these huge steps or many new IPs from Nintendo. You make a good point about the Wii and the Mii stuff, but like that, I think that's a discussion for another day. But the fact that that it takes ostensibly this many years to get a Nintendo IP in the 2010s especially that does reach that level of creativity where it feels like they're making a new world, they're trying something new, they're doing something that will stay around. I think that's maybe where personally, and as a Nintendo fan, as someone who enjoys looking back at Nintendo history, that's where I feel Splatoon is at its most important. Because I look at something like Mario or Pokemon or Zelda, and obviously some of the most iconic franchise of all time, I would argue S tier. I think that's hard to deny. But
Pokemon's
also,
not S tier.
well, I would also kind of argue, as someone who didn't grow up when those games were released, it's kind of hard to see them as these like wonderfully creative reinventions because everything is a Mario, everything is a Pokemon, everything is a Zelda nowadays. And frankly, it takes something like Galaxy or Breath of the Wild or Forgotten Land to an extent to take these franchises and make it me feel like, oh shit, there is still life in them. I look at the design of something like Donkey Kong, like you said, obviously fresh, creative, innovative for its time. But Donkey Kong looks like a fucking 80s character. Because he is. But Splatoon, with its style and its over reliance on freshness and culture and fashion and shit that I don't like, just kidding, that makes it feel like something new that we don't get from Nintendo very often. And I think that the hammer, the nail, is all the way in my head at this point. I'm comfortable. I'm enjoying. I'm sipping a glass of tea on a fucking beach while there's a nail in my head. I'm happy. I'm really starting to agree with all this, and not that I didn't when we started, but because from the angle that I'm talking about here and that you're talking about with Splatoon ostensibly being like the biggest thing Nintendo's done since we were born, potentially.
I think so.
Or the most unique, I would say. I think that's where it's at its most important.
Yeah, the run and gun battle for most important thing of our lifetime. If we're not going to count the iPhone,
sure.
If we're not going to count the corona, oh wait, you can't say that word. If you're not going to count the vaccine, it probably is Splatoon or Animal Crossing.
God, that just shows how much of fucking shitheads we are.
But Nintendo, I almost called you Nintendo. Your name is Tucker.
Yep, that's me.
Tucker Edward Hazel.
Yep.
The last thing I want to say is just a point off of your point that I'm basically my fucking ink tank is empty. If you catch my drift.
Turn into a little puddle, bitch.
I love Donkey Kong. By the way, buy Ninty Fresh magazine issue 6. This is where this comes from. I love Donkey Kong, but there's a lot of characters, even contemporaneous to Donkey Kong, that look like Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about Lanky Kong. I'm talking a lot of Nintendo's characters look, or let's put it this way, Mario, a mascot, but he is one of many mascots of his time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is you made a point before, which I thought was interesting. Of where are the games that look like Splatoon that move like Splatoon? Mm-hmm. You can't look like Splatoon and you can't move like Splatoon, and that is the real kicker. Because Donkey Kong not only looks like an '80s character, but he looks like a lot of animal mascots, right?
Yes, he looks like he should be on a cereal box, and he probably has been.
I'm sure he has been. But you look at an Inkling.
Donkey Kong cereal.
You can't see something else that looks like an Inkling. Yeah. And that is a level of Nintendo creativity that I don't think Nintendo can hit that often.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I'm distracted by Donkey Kong cereal. There was a Donkey Kong cereal. It looks... God, what the fuck are these? Jesus Christ. They're like malformed Captain Crunch pieces. Ew. God.
Please send me the link to that and I'll put it on screen for people to enjoy.
Here's the image.
Because if there's one thing we like here, oh wow, they look like corn pops. What's that cereal called? Pops.
Yeah, but no, pops are like kind of smooth.
Smooth. all of the pops they made for 2005 Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, they were deformed. They shipped it back in fucking 1981 to turn into Donkey Kong cereal.
Yep. Any closing points on this?
My only closing point is that I'm not here to attack anybody. The video is probably going to be framed in an antagonistic way because we're trying to be a little bit more hip to the vibe of the whole YouTube thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody is stupid for not recognizing Splatoon's importance. I don't think anybody is is misguided in thinking that it's not.
Mhm.
The reason I want to do this video is because there is a clear cultural divide. Like this is not a
Yes.
conversation that's going to be had in Japan.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so fascinating about talking about this topic. And it'll be interesting to think maybe in a year from now when Splatoon 3 has been out and
Yeah.
we have a lot of the sales data and we know what that post-release content looked like, to have this conversation and see how many people would disagree. Because right now I think this is a controversial video.
Yeah.
But in 2 years' time, I don't think there's anything controversial about anything we've said.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited for Splatoon 3. It'll be interesting to see how Nintendo pushes external marketing for
Yeah.
Splatoon 3 if they're able to have it catch on, have the multimedia influence be felt over here. And obviously, yes, you're right. This is not attacking anyone. I think that it's
Yeah.
a case of misinformation that I was informed here. I'm excited for the future of Nintendo. Not only because I hope that Splatoon and ARMS and basically that's about it. That spins off into other new franchises that can take this place, that can stand amongst the other S tiers. But I'm also excited to see when Nintendo, hopefully with the launch of Splatoon 3, is able to have Splatoon catch on in the way that it can, that it has in Japan. But again, it hasn't here yet.
Yeah.
Yet, I think is the key word there. And I think that this information, this video, this will be shared till the fucking end of time. Everyone's gonna look at us talking about Donkey Kong Country, like these guys were onto something. They were onto something. And now, 20 years later, when we're talking to our grandkids, we're like, look at what we did.
Our
Look at what we
grandkids
did.
in 20 years.
You heard what I said?
Tucker, you're a scholar and a gentleman.